What's better than beating the Edmonton Oilers in preseason on a shootout? Well, doing so in regulation the next day with a great statement win from the Jets prospects and some veterans, all of which we'll dive into on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more, and right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Now, like I said, on tonight's episode, we're going to be diving into Winnipeg's second preseason game against the Edmonton Oilers. This one didn't need a shootout. It happened in regulation, and it was a big 5-0 shutout for what was essentially the Jets versus the Bakersfield Condors, right? This Oilers lineup, I don't really know most of the players, to be honest. There were a lot of minor leaguers, some prospects, one or two veterans here and there, but for the most part, Edmonton basically just rolled out not even a B lineup. You might even call it like a D lineup. It was rough, right? And I think the scoreline pretty accurately reflects the difference in skill. That's not to say that the Oilers didn't create some chances here and there, but for the most part, there was not a lot happening for the Oilers offense. You'll look at the shot clock and think that Edmonton was really dangerous, but no, wasn't really the case. They had to settle for a lot of point shots and trying to just hit stuff off the rush because for the most part, the Jets really had the run of play elsewhere up the ice. So the Oilers, look, let's be honest, they didn't roll out their best lineup, but you can't choose your opponents. And I think in a lot of ways, the Jets just executed cleanly. This was, cleanly in some areas. We'll talk about some of the other parts later, but for the most part, right, the Jets offense, I thought, looked really dangerous. We saw, a different lineup than we saw in the shootout game. We saw Connor Scheifele and Vilardi on line 1. Line 2 was Baron Kupari and Nemesnikov. Line 3 was Ford, Gustafsson, and Veal. Then you had Torgerson, Lucius, and Reichel bringing up the fourth line. So overall, kind of a nice mixture of guys who are on the moose, maybe moose bound, and a couple of prospects here and there who are fighting for NHL time, right? So overall, this Jets team, I thought, did pretty well. The defense mostly handled its responsibilities. You had Morrissey and Salamanson on the first pairing, Sandberg and Pionk on the second, and then Stanley and Capobianco on the third. You could probably guess how the Stanley-Capobianco pairing fared, but actually, one of them had a goal, Capobianco, and the other, Stanley, had an assist. So despite their struggles out there, they still managed to get themselves on the score sheet in a positive light, so congrats to them. Now, overall, I think there were a couple of really good things to note. For one thing, Vilardi looks like an ideal fit for this team. We'll talk more about his individual performance later in the show, but just high level, very broad strokes, he's going to be a stud for the Jets. I think there's no question in my mind that despite, this being his first game against the AHLers, make no mistake, the skill that Vilardi possesses is real. And I thought that he integrated nicely with Scheifele. I thought that he had some really good shifts. This was a game where I think you watch him and immediately fall in love because you start to see why Kings fans really regarded him very highly. And why, honestly, several years ago, I was personally very high on him. The injuries that really held Vilardi back from superstardom kind of put him on the back foot, and I think made him fall out of the attention spans of a lot of folks. But I promise you, this is a kid that you do not want to take your eyes off. He's got a lethal shot. I'm telling you, the intelligence that he displays in the offensive zone is super dangerous, and I feel like with this Jets team kind of cooking, he looks like he might be really legit. Now, tactically speaking, there were some real good positives. I think offensively, the Jets were able to really dial up the pace, and you saw like what will be the depth lines here in a few weeks generally kind of roll over the AHLers, right? Like the trio of Nemesnikov, and then why am I blanking on this line? Barron and Kupari. This trio for me was the standout for the entire evening. That line was just complete dynamite. I mean, you really couldn't have a better performance than this group, and I think it shows that the Jets this year are likely to have, two third lines basically that they can roll very evenly, which is great because the top six could honestly use some scoring depth and some matchup support on the back end. In terms of how the top six did, very good. I think that the top line had some defensive issues, but overall a strong performance, a couple of goals on special teams, and you really can't be upset. The bottom six, I think, did its job. Gustafsson, anchoring that third line, I think showed why he is still somebody for me that really needs to be given some consideration for the longer term. I think he's like a legit player, and it'd be nice if he got a real chance. Lucius, you can tell he's still shaking off the rust. He was a little bit slow out there, but you could see him trying to, thread some really nice passes, get a couple of, scoring chances off. He's putting in work, and you can tell that he's trying to get himself back up to NHL or even just AHL speed, because the time that he's missed, it's been a bit since he was able to skate again. So happy to see Lucius lacing up and getting back on the ice. It's been too long. And it's just, I'm really hoping that he has a healthy season. That would be really critical for his development, and honestly critical for the Moose too. He's not really ready for the NHL yet, and he might not even be ready for the Moose, but at the very least, if he can join Manitoba and become an effective scorer at that level, let him play the season there, let him get his bearings and confidence back, and then we'll revisit the question sometime either during the playoff run or next season to see where he fits in the grand scheme of things. I honestly sort of wonder if he eventually gets traded, just because the Jets might be looking to bring in some reinforcements. And Lucius, because he has so many injury risks, I do wonder about his long-term future with the org. But I'm hoping that he sticks around and stays, because it's clear from some of the highlights that you see and from some of the shifts that he had in this game, the talent really is there. It's just whether he's going to be able to realize it and actually get a chance to showcase it. Kind of like Vilardi, right? Vilardi had those really rough injuries, and there was a question about what his professional career future trajectory was going to look like, or what it was going to look like. But so far, so good. So excited about it. I'm hoping that Lucius can really build off what should be a successful preseason and training camp, and we can all hope that means good things for the season. Now, I was talking a lot about the overall picture of this game, and I also want to focus on some granular details. Before we dive into all of that and some standout players, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Snap into NHL or NFL action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. For those of you betting on the NFL, you know that the start to this season has been a little bit chaotic, so you might have lost a few games, lost a few bets, but no problem. Even if you bet just a few bucks, you get $200 in bonus bets back, win or lose, which is great news for me, because let me tell you, my fantasy team is not going so hot. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than now. The app is super easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props to over-unders and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and kick off the NFL season in style. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you for joining us in tonight's episode as we dive into preseason action, game number 2 for the Winnipeg Jets against the Edmonton Oilers. Like the first game, the Jets won the second one, but the style was drastically different because the Oilers put out a lineup that, quite frankly, the Jets should have steamrolled, and though it took some time to get rolling, eventually the Jets basically did just take over the game, and the Oilers kind of got pancaked for a solid period and a half. But, all the same, I think we saw some really interesting standout performances. The first one that I think is really worth shouting out, we're going to talk about Vilardi, right? Gabe, or actually he likes to go by Gabriel, so we're gonna call him Gabriel. He really came out swinging. You can see almost from like the drop of the puck that his intelligence in possession, his creativity, his strength and size, his smooth skating, and his ability to find good passing lanes for his teammates naturally led to some good scoring chances. None better than his assist on the power play to Kyle Connor. He surveyed from the goal mouth, looking out across all of the skaters. He knew that Kyle was, of course, on the right flank, and almost without even looking, received a pass and then just deftly back passed it across the crease to Connor, who had basically an open net to shoot at. I mean, it was a beautiful bang sequence. You really couldn't draw it up any better. And I think it really showcased why I'm excited for Vilardi. He's got supernatural spatial awareness. He's got, excellent hand-eye coordination. I think these kinds of plays, even against higher level competition, are going to be relatively straightforward for him. He's just very good. He's a creative dynamo. And he also had a couple of really good shots that, quite frankly, could have gone in if they were a little bit on target, but he just barely missed a few opportunities, had maybe one or two saved, and overall was just a really creative player. And I also thought that he had some really nice defensive plays. He made a couple of smart reads where he picked somebody off, maybe won a board battle. He did all the stuff that coaches really love, and I think that is going to get him a lot of not only cred with the fans, but also cred with the coaching staff. And, with Scheifele and Connor kind of needing somebody to defensively assist with their, shall we say, issues, right? Vilardi seems like he's going to fit very nicely, but he's not sacrificing scoring ability or creativity. He's got that in spades, and I thought we saw very early signs of that. Now, the next player that's really worth shouting out is another new arrival that you're going to want to kind of pencil into your notebooks for the long term. Rasmus Kupari really put on a show in this game. And again, I'm going to qualify this. It was against an NHL or AHL lineup, but listen to me, right? Kupari showed why his skating, his size, and his underrated skill really led to some super dangerous chances. He was diving in and around the net. He had maybe one or two near misses that, quite frankly, could have gone into the net. He was just a menace in this game. And that line of him with Nemesnikov and Barron was just really a wrecking ball the whole evening. Offensively, they had great passes. Their perimeter play that translated to chances in the slot was phenomenal. They were great in transition. I mean, you just really couldn't say anything bad about this unit. Maybe they gave up a couple of chances off the rush, but overall, they created so much going the other way that you just can't complain. And Kupari was also a factor on the PK a couple of times, if I recall correctly. Just a standout performance from him. I really think that there is a legitimate player there. I was very low-key excited about him being part of the trade. I know that he was considered the guy that they basically tossed in, right? Because you had Iafallo, who was a pretty well-established middle six scorer. You had Vilardi, who was a somewhat risky but very likely top six player. And then you had Kupari, who was kind of considered just a depth player, right? A guy to balance out the money and contracts, not somebody that the Kings were really planning with long-term. But you know what? If this game is any indication, maybe they should have. There is something there with him, kind of in the same way that I always talk about Barron, some really underrated skill. If his finishing improves this year, there could be a really sneaky, dangerous player here with Rasmus. And if he can become, a second, third line center for the Jets right alongside Adam Lowry, I think that would be a fantastic development. There's already signs that he's going to seize that role. They've talked about him, in camp as a player who could potentially earn more shifts from the coaching staff. And I'm telling you, if he does what he did tonight on a more consistent basis against NHL caliber competition, there's going to be no problem with him getting ice time. I think this team is going to love him. I think the fans are going to love him. And for, an evening in which you saw Gabriel Vilardi join, maybe one of the most exciting players was Kupari, because we all knew what Vilardi was capable of, but Kupari was a little bit more of an unknown, and yet he really impressed. I think he had a very clearly standout evening. You can't go wrong with that. Aside from that, other standouts, you sort of expect most of these guys to do really well. I thought Salamanson had a slightly uneven game. There were some nasty turnovers here and there, a couple of board clearances that didn't really work. But as the game wore on, he started to really build confidence. You started to see his defensive acumen pick up, his decision-making clean up. He had a couple of really nice shots. His passing was crisp. Once he started getting into the flow of the game against these pros, it really became quite smooth sailing for him. He and Morrissey, I thought, had some solid chemistry. I thought Salamancin's passing and activation offensively looked good. Just a lot to really like in his game, and I think long-term, he is definitely a top 4 candidate for this Jets team. We don't have a lot of right-handed D as it is anyways, especially in the pipeline, so having somebody like Salamancin who looks really like a bona fide top 4 player is a bit of a godsend, right? Other than that, Brossoit was nice in that. Didn't have like crazy amounts of work, but did exactly what he was asked to. The bottom 6, again, like I said, was very solid. David Gustafsson finally scored a goal. Very overdue for me. He could have had another goal where he made a really, really smart darting shift across the goal mouth, and somehow I think it was I don't remember who it was. It was Pickard this evening. He made a great glove save. I don't know if he knew that Gustafsson was coming across because it was very fast, almost bang, bang, but he robbed Gustafsson. I thought Gus was going to score on that chance, which was his first big one of the evening, but his actual goal came off of a tipped Logan Stanley point shot. And if you saw the way that Gustafsson basically overpowered the opposing defender, kind of towered over him and got his stick around his body so that he could tip the puck, it just shows you how much underappreciated and underrated skill Gustafsson has. I continue to say that he is, for me, a really sleeper player for this team, and if he ever finds himself in a role where he gets genuine skill to work with, I'm telling you, Gustafsson has another gear to reach. I know people are like looking at him and seeing his offensive numbers and thinking, how on earth could I possibly say that? But I promise you, give him the right scorers on his wings, and he will start to reward you with excellent passing, a relentless work ethic, and a forecheck that could make Paul Maurice probably cry. So a lot to like in this game. I think that there's some good stuff, but overall, big picture, I do want to talk about one other thing, and that's the fact that the depth is starting to cook and why that's really important for this year's team, especially with the fact that the Jets, quite frankly, can't afford too many injuries. We'll dive into all of that in just a little bit. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we talk about Winnipeg's preseason performance, which was overall, an interesting game, right? The first half was a little bit uneven, a little bit sloppy, and then in the second half, they took over. Things got fun. The Jets win shutout 5-0, right? But what I think was really the most important takeaway, and again, I've always qualified everything that I've said here, that the Oilers roster was really bad, but still, you can't choose your opponents. You still got to take care of business, and the Jets did that in spades. And I was especially impressed with some of the guys who were going to be filling in Winnipeg's middle and bottom 6. Like I said, Nemesnikov, Barron, and Kupari were just an absolute terror to behold. They steamrolled their opponent matchups. I mean, they really crushed those minutes. I really can't say enough about this group. I thought that trio was very much the best unit on the ice. They were so good in transition. They were great down low when they were asked to do penalty kill stuff, individually. All of these guys really stepped up to the plate, even creating some odd man rushes the other way on the shorthanded opportunities. So just a lot to like. I really felt like they could probably have had 1 or 2 more goals, but they'll just have to settle for the one this evening from Barron, who found himself the recipient of a great Josh Morrissey pass right into the slot. At this point, the Oilers were just gassed. And you know what? I mean, you can't really get too upset. I mean, like, this is a performance where the Jets basically bullied a bunch of AHLers, right? So Barron found himself in open space, really had all day to shoot, picked the corner clean, and made it. I don't even know if this was the 4th or 5th goal, but at that point, it didn't even matter. The Jets were in firm control, but it felt like a really nice reward for what had been just another menacing shift from this line. They created so many turnovers. They really capitalized on offensive opportunities down low, got into some really dangerous chances, even had some odd man rushes. Like I said, just a complete dominant performance. And that, I think, is really critical because the Jets also have, Lowry, Iafallo, and Appleton as another third line in this group. I'm going to be honest. I think this line is probably not going to be as effective. I think it'll be fine because I think Iafallo will do well with Lowry. Appleton, I'm hoping, can keep up. I know that I've said Mason has kind of slowed down over the past couple of seasons. I think it would be really good for him to have a stronger year this season. Not because, I just want the Jets to do well, but also on a personal level, would just be nice if Mason can kind of get back into the form that made him an intriguing replacement for Kopp couple of seasons ago. It's not really panned out that way, and I wish it had, but overall, if Appleton is just a solid fourth liner, that's okay. You might want to reset his contract expectations a little bit, but in the meantime, it'd be nice if he can get some chemistry with Iafallo and Lowry and start to maybe hit pay dirt a little more frequently, because he does score. He's got some soft hands. It's just a question of whether he's going to be in a position to use them. That kind of remains a little bit unknown, but overall, I can't complain too much about this game. I thought it was really nice. I think it was great to see how much depth the Jets can rely upon, because in terms of the top six, if the Jets lose a single player in that group, it's going to be tough to find goals. So one of the guys like Kupari might have to step up, but if anything, that we saw in this game was an indication, maybe that's not the worst outcome. Barron, finding pay dirt is also nice. I'd really like him to get some more goals this year, because it's clear that he's in the right areas and he's taking some dangerous shots. It's just that they haven't always gone in for him. So hopefully he gets rewarded. That'd be great. I think I would be a big fan of that. Just a lot to really enjoy in this game. Now, before we close out, I thought I would add two more thoughts. One thing that I really like seeing was that the Jets D were very aggressive, both in their own end and further up the ice. I thought that they pinched off space well. I thought that they put pressure on Edmonton to make, clean passes. I thought they made life heck during, transitions through the neutral zone and that Winnipeg's blue line, which is good to see. And then offensively, they were dropping in deep. They were activating around the faceoff circles. Sometimes they'd go towards the goal line. Whatever you wanted them to do, they seemingly did as best as they could. Capobianco and Stanley, less so. You notice that pair doesn't have a ton of foot speed, so they had to measure their moves a little bit more carefully, but even still, they managed to record some points, and overall, just a really solid win from this team. Like I said, I'm trying not to qualify it too much, because you do still play professional opponents here, and the Oilers put out some AHLers and depth players, but Winnipeg was expected to take care of business in this game, and they absolutely did. It was a very dominant performance, and Brossoit getting a shutout was nice. Kind of funny that he did it against his old team, but overall, yeah, it makes me excited to see how this team starts to take shape over the next few weeks. I think we're already seeing some combos that are likely to stay together. That first line is going to stay together. That second line is probably going to stay together. I suppose from here on out, it's figuring out whether guys like David Gustafsson have a role with this team, or if they're going to be fighting for the 13th forward spot. For my money, I really feel like Gustafsson needs to be in somehow. I don't know how you fit him in, if you put him in at wing or something, but you really got to get him in. He's probably an upgrade on Appleton, which I feel terrible for saying, but I think that's the truth. And hopefully, he really gets the chance to shine. Like I said, you put him alongside Skill, I think he's going to reward you handsomely. I would also like to see, some more of the blue line activation. I thought Pionk looked pretty solid this evening. Saw an article from Kem Weeb recently about how Pionk is often very hard on himself and sort of dwells on his mistakes, which I've said in the past, he's called his own performance embarrassing. I feel like that's just not very fair to himself, whether, you like him or not, or think his performance has been acceptable or not. Saying your performance was embarrassing, probably a little bit much, right? Hopefully this game where he scored a goal and was a lot more effective, helps rebuild his confidence in preparation for this season, which should be a fun one for pretty much everyone involved. So crossing fingers, I like what I saw. I think that there's more to come from this team. And as these lines really start to gel together and the defensive combos also start to work in, better unison, I think that there's something there for this team to maybe take into a postseason berth. But let me know your thoughts on this game. Drop them in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that is all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We will see you back here tomorrow for even more preseason coverage as we roll into next year. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.